We often think of the story of the potter and the clay, and we should. That's an awesome story, an awesome analogy of the fact that we're supposed to be clay in the master's hands, and he can do with us what he wants to. And this week, early in the week, I'd heard a song, and I asked Daniel, I said, Daniel, try to find it. I'd love to be able to sing it Sunday morning, and we couldn't find it. I found the words, I found the music, but not a soundtrack, and so you're blessed. I've decided not to sing it. But as I continued on the week, I worked on some other thoughts, and I actually had one that I thought that I was going to share this morning, but I just wasn't comfortable with it. And I knew I had a sermon, but I don't like sermons. You say, don't you give us one every Sunday? I try not to. I try to give you a message. See, sermon's just thoughts and process. And so I had a sermon, but I didn't like it, and I felt that God was talking to me and sharing me something. And again, the words of that song, in a few minutes I'll share it with you. But I felt like God was sharing with me a little and wanted me to be a little bit transparent today. And see, in college they tell you, Bible college, you're not supposed to be transparent. You're supposed to always have be strong, not have any problems. But I found out honesty is the best policy. And so, and normally I don't have any problems with depression. But this week I had some issues with it. My wife asked me, what's wrong? I said, I don't know. I'm just depressed. You know, and could be that I'm getting ready to go on vacation, and the hurrier I went, the further behind I got. Any of you know what I'm talking about? And I had so many things going on and dealing with sickness and injuries and families going through turmoil and people asking me, Pastor, what am I going to do? And like I said, it's just been one of those weeks. And so I began to think about, and I'm not sharing this to get pity because that's the furthest thing from the truth. I just want you to know that all of us have a story. All of us have a story to write. And there are some weeks that we'd like to leave out of our book. Huh? There's some pages that you'd like to throw away because they just weren't good memories. And that was when God began to speak to me about what I want to share with you this morning. 2 Corinthians chapter 3. You yourselves are our letter of recommendation to you or from you. You yourselves are a letter written on our hearts, known and read by everybody. That means you're a book. Everybody's reading it, whether you want them to or not. You show that you are a letter from Christ, the results of our ministry, written not with ink, but with the Spirit of the living God, not on tablets of stone, but on tablets of human hearts. Such confidence that this is ours through Christ before God. Not that we're competent in ourselves to claim anything for ourselves, but our competence comes from God. He has made us competent as ministers of a new covenant, not of the letter, but of the Spirit. For the letter kills, but the Spirit gives life. And if you go with me to the Gospel of John, chapter 10, John 10, verse 7. Therefore, Jesus said again, I tell you the truth. I am the gate for the sheep. All who ever came before me were thieves and robbers, but the sheep did not listen to them. I am the gate. Whoever enters through me will be saved. He will come in and go out and find pasture. The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I have come that they might have life and have it to the full. King James Version says, life and have it more abundantly. I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. I'd like for us to think about the topic today that your life is a book. And you're not the author. You're the main character. You're the main character of your life. You've got a story. But there's two enemies that are not enemies to you, but they're two rivals, I should say, that are vying for your life. There's God that wants to give you life and life more abundantly. Then there's an enemy that wants to steal from you, to kill you, and to destroy you. He wants to take away your joy. He wants to destroy your testimony. He wants to destroy your life. And so in that, there's a story. Your life is a story. And God is the author. He has a plan for you. And guess what? He knows the end of the story. He knows not just the beginning, but the ending as well. But God allows us to a degree to dictate a little bit of our story. Because I believe that if we would totally allow God to write our story, it would probably be a lot smoother and better story than what we've got in our lives. Because I know that you're more spiritual than this, but sometimes I want to take the pen. I want to write my own story. And guess what? He lets me do it. And it's there. Never to be erased. You say, wait a minute, God can forgive us. Yes, He does. But see, the consequences of our actions are still there. The story is still written. And there's some of you today saying, man, I wish there were some chapters in my life that I could throw away. I wish there were hours that I could stay away. But the reality is we can't. But if we would allow God to write the story, we may not start out with those words, once upon a time, but we could certainly end up living happily ever after. That's the title of my message today, Happily Ever After. The words of the song that I wanted to share with you is a song by the Taylors. And it says, you know the road that I'm walking down, the pain and fear I'm feeling now. I'm looking back to move ahead. And the chorus is, for what I don't know, I'll trust you will. Let me say that again. For what I don't know, I will trust your will. If I shouldn't go, then I'll be still till I have peace down in my soul, because you understand what I don't know. It says, please go before and lead the way. You know it's easy, Lord, to stray. Oh, gentle shepherd, be my guide. I am protected when I'm by your side. I know the plan you have for me to walk in faith and victory. Standing on your word, I will believe. And the chorus says, for what I don't know, I'll trust your will. If I shouldn't go, then I'll be still till I have peace down in my soul, because you understand what I don't know. Wow. Is it really possible that whenever I don't know what I can do and what I'm supposed to do, I can trust Him? Can I really give Him the pen and say, God, write my life, write my story, because you know better than I do. Write it. Do I really have enough faith to say, as a songwriter, when I don't know, I trust your will? But are you like me? Sometimes we wrestle the pen away from God and say, let me write the story. God, I can write a better story than you. And I know you say, well, I would never say that. We do it every time we get out of God's will. We're saying we know better than what God does. We wrestle the pen away and we begin to write our own story. And boy, in this room today, there's lots of stories. And I'm going to tell you, there's a lot more drama than there needs to be. Huh? But when we write the story, we put the drama in there. And some are more dramatic than others. Some of us are fiction, totally fiction. You know what I'm talking about? Because we're writing the story. And God says, I want to write your story. Didn't the Bible say that we're living epistles, read of all men? And people are reading our lives whether we want them to or not. How many of you will admit that you have made some mistakes and some bad choices? Good. Young people, look around. That one has been preaching at you. Okay, let me ask you, how many will admit that you made some mistakes and made some bad choices and you knew you were making that choice and you still made it? Boy, you're slow learners. But you notice I raised my hand too. Because we do that because we're human. We have these stories and we make mistakes and we do these things. Now, some of you may say, well, I don't know that God's the author. Well, let's just read what the book says. Acts chapter 3, verse 15. When Peter was preaching at the day of Pentecost. Now, Peter had already backslidden, but he'd come back to the Lord, so I think he was preaching the truth. And you know what he said? He said, you killed the author of life. But God raised him from the dead. What do we read? It says he's the giver of life. So isn't that the same as the author of life? He's the giver of life, and he gives it more abundantly. How about Hebrews 2, 10 and 11? Look what it says. And bringing many sons to glory, it was fitting that God, for whom and through whom everything exists, should make the author of their salvation perfect through suffering. Who was the author of their salvation? Jesus Christ. He made him perfect through suffering. Both the one who makes men holy and those who are made holy are the same family. So Jesus is not ashamed to call them brothers. I want to tell you what, sometimes I run some Christians I'm almost ashamed to call brothers, but Jesus said I'm not. Because they've been redeemed. Let's look at one other scripture. Hebrews chapter 12. Let us fix our eyes on Jesus, the author and the perfecter of our faith, who for the joy set before him endured the cross, scorning its shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. The author of my story is God. I am just the main character. And guess what? I get to star in my own show. You get the star of your own show because you are the favorite character of God for your life. And thank God there's only one of you. There's only one book like you. Now, the reality is whenever I take the pen and write in it, I mess it up. And I would like, if I took all the pages that I had scribbled on and I was able to take them and throw them away, my book would be thin. It'd be thin because we've all made mistakes and we scribble on it. But the beautiful thing is this author, see, this author that created this universe, this author that's the great creator and the great liberator and so many things, he's also a great author. He has the ability to take your story after you've messed it up. Can't erase it. See, there's a lot of people in prison today that messed up their story. And they may be just as converted or free as you and I are. But they're still in prison because their story was written and they can't erase it. See, when we write our story, and some of you have got some things that you're ashamed of, and maybe we should be ashamed of them, but could I suggest to you that we turn those scabs into scars? Let God totally heal it and let that scar be a trophy and say, look what God's done for me. Look what yes, I've had cancer 4 times, but look what God has done for me. And through it all, God has blessed me because He's writing a story and I have to remember to let Him write it. Because we have a tendency to take the pen away. Well, I know that God can remove the stain of sin, but the consequences of sin, many times we have to pay for them. And I don't want to put any guilt or condemnation on anyone here, because I would be the first to say there's some pages I wish I could take out of my book. But they're written. But the good news is, young folks, listen to this. The good news, God can take that mess that we made and write it and make a beautiful story. And let the ending be, they lived happily ever after. Start with it, might not be so good. I want to say something particularly to the young people today, or maybe some of you older ones that might apply to. You heard about us talking about divorce care. I wish there was no such thing as divorce, but the reality, it's with us. And I'm glad that God heals and restores. I said, I'm glad that God heals and restores. But I'm so thankful that in the story that God wrote for me, that I allowed Him to write the chapter and the story of the love of my life. The only girl that I ever dated became my wife. And I'm so thankful for that, because I'm going to tell you something. Many people married the wrong person. And some of you that raised your hands a while ago, you said, yeah, I knew I was making a mistake when I did it. But I did it anyway because I was in love. So young people, let me give you some words of advice that was given to me at my college professor the first year. Never date someone that would not make a good mate. If you don't want to live your life with them, don't date them. I knew it was going to get quiet there. I had that in my notes. Expect quietness. But the reality is, that's where so many people mess up their stories, because they want to write it. And I know, ladies, you say, well, I can change that rascal. My wife has been working me. We've been married 48, been dating for over 4 years. So over 50 years she's been trying to change me. Folks, it hadn't worked. She's stuck with me. But I'm going to tell you, I'm so glad that that's one page that I didn't have to take out and say, I wish it wasn't there. Because we make those mistakes. And we need to make sure that we honor those people that God placed in our lives. Many of us, we already admitted, we've scribbled on our pages. We made some wrong choices. We all have. I said we all have. But don't you think the author of life, the author of faith, the author of your story, don't you think he knows how to correct it and make a wonderful story at it and let it turn into a beautiful story? How about Jacob? Man, we talked about him just a couple of weeks ago. He had seasons, right? He went through some torment. He went through some terror, but God was able to take his story. Why? Because he allowed God to keep the pen of his life and let him write the story. And went through some difficult times. And I look back, and have you ever thought about how God would have liked to have written the Bible? Huh? Have you ever stopped to think about that? See, on the story of the prodigal son, how would he have liked to have written that? You say, well, he wrote it the way he wanted to. No, I don't think so. I think he would have liked to have bragged on the older brother and said the older brother came to his dad and said, let me go get my brother. But he didn't write it that way. Because the other brother was full of pride and arrogance and didn't want anything to do with his brother. And we could go on and on. How would he have liked to tell the story of David and Goliath? You say, well, wait a minute. God had all that planned. Yes, he plans things out. But he could have worked out another plan if people had been doing it the way God wanted it to. See, God has to rewrite stories every day. Aren't you glad he's a good author? Aren't you glad he's a good author? Because he has to rewrite them, because we mess up. And there's only one guy in the world that made money by messing up, and that was a guy that invented the zipper. He became rich for messing up, right? Some of y'all had to explain. It's bad when you have to explain your jokes. It's bad. In Matthew, Jesus shared a story. Crowd of people. The book of Matthew. It's part of the Sermon on the Mount. Look what it says, verse 24. Therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a wise man who builds his house on the rock. The rain came down, the streams rose, and the wind blew and beat against that rock, yet it did not fall because he had its foundation on the rock. But everyone who hears these words of mine and does not put them into practice is a foolish man. In other words, if you want to write your own story, God will let you. If you want to be a foolish man, God will allow you to have the pen and let you write your story. And I'm going to guarantee you 99 times out of 100, you're going to make a mess of it. Because that's what a foolish man does. But everyone who hears these words of mine and does not put them into practice is like a foolish man who built his house on the sand. The rains came down, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against the house, and it fell with a crash. And when Jesus had finished these things, the crowds were amazed at his teachings because he taught as one who had authority and not as their teachers of the law. He taught as someone that had the ability to rewrite the story. He had the ability to correct the wrongs. He had the ability to take that what the enemy intended for destruction and to turn it into something good. And I know some of you are sitting back there and say, well, but Pastor, God can do that when he's got a lot to work with, but I'm not much. I think most of us go through that time in somewhere in our life. We feel like, well, God can do that for them because they're something special. They're worth something. But see, Satan likes to destroy us. And one of the ways is telling you how insignificant and how sorry and how much of a nobody you are. And if he lets you write your story, you know what? You're going to let that influence your story. I said, you're going to let him influence that story. But when we begin to allow the Holy Spirit to write the story and help us to realize who we are in Christ Jesus. Remember that? It says it's not our own ability, it's God's ability. There's another song that I want to share, and I want the brethren to come begin to distribute the elements of communion. And I want you to listen to this story. It's a song entitled A Man Like Me, because I can relate to it, and I think probably you can too. I don't have that much to give, or so it seems. Just a farm kid from the country is all that I'd ever be. But he saved me and he spoke to me to share the gospel truth, and I wonder why he chose me. There's so little I can do. But the chorus of that song says this: if he can use some rugged wood and those 3 rusty nails, if he can use the fallen inside of a pagan Roman jail, if he can use a storm-tossed fishing boat on the Sea of Galilee, he can use a simple, searching, wounded, hurting, broken man like me. The song goes on to say there's so many stories. The Bible that I read, his purpose is fulfilled by the simplest of things. When I was lost, I sowed my oats, reaped more than a few. But since God reached out to me, I've learned a thing or two. It's not the tools he uses, it's the power in his touch. I remind myself when I start thinking, it's not all that much. Oh, I know I'm not the greatest man, but I don't have to be. Because if he can use some rugged wood, those 3 rusty nails, if he can use the fallen inside of pagan Roman jails, if he can use a storm-tossed fishing boat on the Sea of Galilee, he can use a simple, searching, wounded, hurting, broken man like me. Let me read that line again and listen to it. He can use a simple, searching, wounded, hurting, broken man like me. If He can use 3 rusty nails and those old rugged wood, then He can use us. And He wants to write a story, regardless of what your past looks like, regardless of what your story may look like up till today. He has the ability to write a wonderful ending to it. My wife reads a lot of mysteries. And you know, sometimes when I don't have anything else to read, I'll pick one up. And I'm convinced that that writer knows what the story's going to end up before he gets there. You say, why? Because he's an author. He knows where he's headed. And sometimes we think that we know better than God knows how to write your story. But remember, He knows the end. He knows what you've been through. He knows what you're going through today. He knows what you're going to face tomorrow. He knows how to put that story, make something good out of it, so that we truly can end the story by saying they lived happily ever after, because we leave this world